Victor Stone stood behind the bar, a half-empty glass in hand, his gaze fixed on the swirling liquid inside. The dim light from the flickering station lights bounced off the surface, casting shadows across the worn wood. The air smelled of stale sweat, synthetic alcohol, and the unmistakable tension of war. A soft hum vibrated through the metal walls of the space station as the occasional distant explosion shook the station's frame. Outside the reinforced glass windows, the vast emptiness of space lay in all its dark glory, silent, unforgiving, and utterly indifferent. This was the last place anyone would expect to find a war hero. But Victor wasn't just any bartender. He wasn't even a bartender, really. He was a man who had once been feared across entire galaxies. The heavy footsteps of a newcomer echoed through the bar as the door slid open. Victor didn't need to look up. He had heard these footsteps before, quick, purposeful, and deliberate. Someone who wasn't here for a drink but for something else. The man in the doorway was tall, his frame encased in the standard rebellion armor, though it was obvious he wasn't here for any fight. Not yet. Stone, the man called out, his voice low, laced with urgency. You're needed. We've found something. The Resistance, they need you. Victor didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the glass, his fingers tracing the rim in slow circles. I'm not the man you think I am, he muttered, his voice rough from years of silence. You're the only one who can help. We need your expertise. Victor finally looked up. His face was a portrait of quiet strength, a man who had seen too much and said too little. His dark eyes, once full of fire, were now distant, haunted by memories he would never share. The last thing this galaxy needs is another hero, he replied, his words heavy with regret. What's left of the Resistance can handle their own. The man shook his head, stepping closer. You don't understand. This is different. We've intercepted alien transmissions. They're planning something bigger. The fall of Earth was just the beginning. If we don't stop them, they'll wipe out everything we've built. Victor clenched his jaw. The name, Earth, hit him like a punch to the gut, reminding him of what had been lost, what he had lost. His family, his home, his entire world. All gone in the blink of an eye, destroyed by forces he couldn't fight, abandoned by the very leaders who were supposed to protect them. His eyes softened for just a moment, and then, like a switch flipping, his expression hardened. He pushed the glass aside, the sharp scrape of it against the bar cutting through the tense silence. What's the plan? The man hesitated, knowing that Victor's involvement came at a cost. But time was running out. We need you back in the field. We've got a lead on a rogue AI, the one responsible for coordinating the alien forces. It's building an army, and we can't stop it without you. Victor stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. I'm not the same man you knew. I left that life behind. I've seen enough bloodshed. Enough betrayal. The newcomer took a step back, trying to read Victor's face. He had heard the stories, the rumors about Victor Stone, the last of Earth's most elite warriors. A living legend who fought in wars that shattered civilizations. But that man was gone, replaced by the silent figure before him. You're the only one who can get us through this. There's no one else. Please. Victor's gaze lingered on the man for a long moment, his hand resting on the bar. Silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Then, with a heavy sigh, Victor wiped his palms on his trousers. His fingers twitched, old instincts, muscles he had not used in years, aching to be released. All right, Victor said, his voice low, barely audible. I'll do it. But we go on my terms. He reached for his jacket hanging on the chair and slid it on. His fingers brushed against the edge of his old combat vest beneath it, a relic of his past. I don't need anyone breathing down my neck. Just tell me where to go. The man nodded quickly, grateful for the answer but still visibly wary of what this might mean. There's a station on the outskirts of this system. We've tracked the AI's signal there. But it's crawling with alien troops. We don't stand a chance without you. Victor felt his pulse quicken, a rush of adrenaline he hadn't felt in years. His mind began to race, calculating the danger, weighing the risk. This was no longer about revenge or redemption. This was survival. "Let's make sure they know we're coming," Victor muttered, his voice hardening with a familiar, dangerous edge. "We'll give them a reminder of who we are." The man hesitated but then realized this wasn't the same man who had once been broken by loss. This was the Victor Stone the galaxy feared. The one who could turn the tide of war in a single, brutal strike. Victor stepped past the man, his boots echoing as they hit the metal floor. His hand instinctively reached for the weapon belt tucked under his jacket, fingers wrapping around the familiar weight of his old sidearm. It had been a long time since he'd held a weapon like this, but it felt right. "You coming, or are you just going to stand there?" Victor asked, his voice sharp. The man, now fully understanding what this meant, followed him quickly, the sound of his boots falling in rhythm with Victor's. The door to the bar slid open again as the two men stepped outside into the cold, mechanical heart of the station. The hum of activity was deafening, the sound of survival, of people too tired to care. But now, a new energy buzzed in the air, a reminder that in the vast expanse of space, humanity was still capable of resistance. Victor Stone wasn't just another relic of the past. He was humanity's last hope. And it was time to remind the galaxy of just who they were messing with. End of Chapter 1. The cold metallic walls of the space station hummed with an eerie silence as Victor Stone and his companion, the unnamed rebel, made their way toward the docking bay. Their footsteps echoed through the narrow hallways, a sound too loud for such a desolate place. Each corner they turned, the tension grew. They passed soldiers moving with purpose, faces grim and eyes clouded with exhaustion. There was no celebration in their steps, just a slow, inevitable march toward an uncertain fate. Victor's mind was already elsewhere. His thoughts were a storm, spinning around the mission ahead, and the weight of what they were about to face. He hadn't been in action in years, not since Earth's fall. The last time he had drawn a weapon, it had been in the streets of his hometown, fighting a losing battle against an unstoppable alien force. He had seen too many friends and comrades fall. But this time, the stakes were higher. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. They reached the hangar, and a sleek, heavily modified shuttle sat waiting. The rebels had been scrambling to keep the alien forces at bay, using whatever scrap parts they could find, and this ship was no exception. It had the look of a fighter with a crew that didn't have the luxury of fancy tech or endless resources. But Victor didn't care. He had always thrived in chaos, and right now, chaos was his only ally. The door to the shuttle slid open with a hiss. The rebel officer gestured for Victor to enter, but he paused at the threshold, his eyes scanning the small crew already seated inside. They were mostly young faces, eyes burning with determination but also with fear. They were untested. It showed. "Any of you ever fought a war?" Victor's voice broke the silence. His gaze swept over the crew, locking onto each one in turn. There was a moment of hesitation, before a tall woman near the back spoke up. "Not a real one," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her eyes. "But we've trained. We've been waiting for someone like you." Victor's lips twisted into something like a smile. "You're going to need more than training." He moved to an empty seat, his movements deliberate, and strapped himself in. His eyes fell on the view of the station through the glass. The stars outside were silent, distant. No longer did they represent hope. They were now only markers for the enemies who sought to extinguish the last light of humanity. As the shuttle's engines rumbled to life, the young rebel officer began outlining the mission. "We've intercepted multiple alien transmissions. They're planning to deploy an AI-driven army, and we believe they're going to launch it from a hidden station near the outer rim. We think it's the last piece of their plan to wipe us out for good. We're the only ones left to stop it." Victor's hand tightened around the armrest. "And you want me to be your hammer?" The officer's face remained stoic, but his voice betrayed his worry. "We're out of options. You're the only one who can infiltrate their stronghold and disable the AI. If you succeed, we can stop the invasion. If not, humanity's as good as dead." Victor finished for him, his voice flat. The officer nodded, but the weight of the truth hung in the air between them. The galaxy had been at war for so long that the line between survival and extinction had become blurred. The aliens had come for Earth first. They had come to take everything. And they had nearly succeeded. Victor closed his eyes for a moment, letting the past flood back. The screams of his comrades, the taste of dust in the air, the haunting image of his burning city. He had vowed to never pick up a weapon again after that day. But now, faced with the harsh reality of their situation, he knew there was no turning back. The shuttle's engines hummed louder as they broke free from the station's gravitational pull. The stars outside grew brighter, but to Victor, they were nothing more than distant lights marking the path to an uncertain future. Hours later, they neared the coordinates. The rebel officer had fallen silent, staring at the data scrolling across his console. Victor had long since stopped paying attention to the details. He trusted the officer's assessment, even though he didn't trust much else about this mission. The shuttle's sensors pinged, and the officer looked up. "We're here." The coordinates led them to an uncharted moon, one that had been abandoned and forgotten by most of the galaxy. But it wasn't empty. The station was hidden in the shadow of the moon, its dark silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of stars. The station wasn't just a military installation, it was a fortress, and it reeked of death. Victor stood, moving toward the shuttle's rear hatch. "Let's make sure they know we're coming," he said, his voice cold and detached. His hands moved automatically to his gear. He felt the weight of his weapon, the familiar, comforting pull of his combat knife at his side. The crew shuffled behind him, their faces pale but resolute. They had never seen a battle like this, and they knew it. The odds were stacked against them, but they had no choice. They had come too far to turn back. Victor's voice cut through the silence of the shuttle bay as he moved to the hatch. "Stay close. Keep your heads down. If you want to survive this, follow my lead." The hatch hissed open, and the cold air of the moon greeted them. The station loomed ahead, its dark corridors waiting to be filled with the sounds of battle. As they moved toward the station's entrance, Victor could feel the old instincts awakening in him, the soldier he once was pushing to the forefront. He could almost hear the rhythm of the battlefield, the thrum of gunfire, the rush of adrenaline, the sickening smell of burning metal. A sudden explosion nearby shattered the silence. Victor's heart skipped a beat, but his training kicked in. He moved without thinking, pulling his weapon and crouching low behind a nearby rock. "We've been compromised," the officer whispered, his voice shaking. "They know we're here." Victor's lips curled into a grim smile. "Let them come." The first shots rang out, and the night erupted into chaos. Victor didn't hesitate. He moved like a predator, silent, efficient, unstoppable. The battle was a blur of violence and sound, and Victor was at its center, guiding the rebels through the chaos. His movements were a deadly dance, one he had performed 1,000 times before. But as the gunfire died down, and the smoke began to clear, Victor's eyes fell on the distant shape of the alien commander. The real battle was still ahead. The explosion rattled the walls of the station, sending a shower of sparks cascading from the ceiling. The metallic floor beneath Victor's boots trembled, but he didn't flinch. He had been through worse. Much worse. The sound of gunfire filled the air, accompanied by the distant roar of the alien war machines advancing through the corridors. Victor crouched low, his eyes scanning the flickering lights ahead. The rebels had done their best to make a stand, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. He could see the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty that had begun to seep into their every movement. They weren't ready for this kind of battle, not yet. "Stay sharp." Victor's voice cut through the chaos, low and commanding. "We've got one chance at this. Stick together, and we move fast." The rebel officer nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Understood." Victor led them down the narrow corridor, his steps purposeful, every movement calculated. He could feel the heat of the battle pressing in on them, the weight of every decision they made. This wasn't just about stopping the alien AI anymore. It was about humanity's survival. As they neared the control room, the sound of movement behind them intensified. Alien soldiers, their bodies clad in black, hulking armor, rounded the corner, their weapons raised. There was no time for subtlety. "Move!" Victor yelled, diving behind a metal pillar as the first shots rang out. The rebels scattered, taking cover wherever they could find it. Victor's instincts kicked in. He rolled to his feet, his weapon raised in one fluid motion. The first alien soldier fell before it even knew what hit it. His gunfire was precise, deadly, a testament to years of training and experience. The rebels hesitated for a split second, unsure whether to follow or wait for an opening. But Victor didn't wait. He dashed forward, taking out 2 more soldiers in quick succession. The hallway echoed with the sounds of battle, alien screams, the crackle of gunfire, and the thud of bodies hitting the ground. One of the rebels, a young man named Alec, hesitated at the corner. "Victor, there." "Go!" Victor snapped, his voice sharp, cutting through the noise. "We don't have time for second guesses." Alec nodded, his face pale but determined, and followed Victor's lead, charging toward the control room doors. Victor's hand reached for the door control, slamming it open with a force that sent it crashing against the wall. The control room was dimly lit, filled with rows of blinking consoles and alien technology that hummed with a disturbing rhythm. At the far end of the room, a large holographic display showed a map of the galaxy, with coordinates for the alien invasion already mapped out. But there was no time to admire the view. Victor strode into the room, gun raised, scanning for threats. The room was empty, but the silence was unnerving. He moved to the central console, his fingers flying across the alien keypad, trying to access the system. It was a complex piece of technology, and time was slipping away with every passing second. "Victor!" The officer's voice was tight with fear. "We don't have long. The AI is waking up." Victor didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the screen, watching as the system hummed to life. The AI was a complex web of code, its core buried deep beneath layers of firewalls and encrypted files. But Victor had faced worse. He'd cracked systems like this before, under far more extreme conditions. He could feel the sweat dripping down his forehead as his fingers flew faster, his pulse quickening. The sound of the alien soldiers approaching was growing louder, their footsteps echoing in the hallway outside. Victor had to move faster. "Come on, come on!" he muttered under his breath, his hands trembling only slightly. He was close, so close to unlocking the system, to stopping the AI from activating. Suddenly, the door behind them exploded, sending debris flying across the room. The rebels scrambled for cover, their weapons firing blindly into the cloud of dust and smoke. Victor's heart raced. They weren't alone anymore. The alien commandos had arrived. One of the rebels, a woman named Kara, was caught in the blast, her body thrown against the far wall. "Kara!" Alex screamed, but the chaos of the moment drowned out his voice. Victor's eyes flickered toward the door, his mind calculating the risk. If they didn't hold off the aliens, the mission would fail. The AI would launch its army, and humanity would be wiped out. But the rebels were too green, too inexperienced. He was the only one who could turn the tide. He made a snap decision. "Cover me!" Victor barked. "I'll finish the job. You fight them off." Without waiting for a response, he bolted toward the central control panel, ignoring the shots flying around him. The heat from the blasts was intense, but his focus remained on the screen, his mind locked on the task at hand. The AI's core was just a few keystrokes away. The rebels opened fire, their guns roaring as they held the line against the alien soldiers pouring into the room. Alec was the first to fall, his body riddled with blaster fire. Kara, wounded but not out, picked up the slack, her hands shaking as she fired into the advancing aliens. Victor didn't flinch. His hands were steady, his fingers moving across the control panel as the countdown to the AI's launch began. The pressure was unbearable, the weight of the moment pushing down on him, but he refused to let it break him. His mind was a machine, calculating the exact moment when the system would give him the opening he needed. "Almost there," he whispered to himself, his pulse pounding in his ears. The holographic screen blinked, and the countdown paused for a fraction of a second. Victor seized the opportunity, slamming his hand onto the emergency override button. The entire system shuddered, and the hologram flickered, then went dark. The room fell silent. Victor looked up, his breath heavy. The AI was offline. For now. But the fight wasn't over. The alien forces were closing in, and there was no escape. The rebels were too few, and the odds were still stacked against them. Victor knew they couldn't hold out much longer. He turned to the officer, his voice low but certain. "We've bought some time. But it's not enough." The officer nodded, his face pale but grateful. "What do we do now?" Victor's eyes narrowed. "Now we fight for everything." Victor Stone stood in the heart of the control room, his breath ragged, eyes scanning the darkened space. The quiet was deafening. The alien AI had been neutralized for now, but the immediate danger hadn't passed. The rebels who had made it this far were battered, their numbers dwindling. The alien forces were relentless, and time was running out. "Is it over?" Kara's voice trembled, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. She had been by his side throughout this, her determination matching his, but the toll was visible. She was breathing heavily, and her uniform was smeared with dust and blood. The rest of the rebels had fallen back, taking refuge behind makeshift barricades they had hastily thrown together in the midst of the chaos. Victor didn't answer immediately. His fingers brushed the holographic display, running calculations through his mind. The AI's core had been disrupted, but it had only been a temporary shutdown. Without a permanent solution, the alien forces would simply reboot it, and the galaxy would burn. "We've won nothing yet," he finally said, his voice low. "We're still sitting on a ticking time bomb." There was a faint rumble from deep within the station, followed by the crackling of the comms. The alien forces had regrouped, and the station was no longer just a battleground. It was a trap. Victor turned to the officer, his eyes steady. "We need to destroy the core. For good. But we're running out of time," the officer said, his voice strained with urgency. "We can't get to the core without them knowing, without them locking it down." Victor's eyes narrowed as he turned to face the console once again. A deep instinct gnawed at him. The alien forces were too coordinated. Too precise. It was as if they knew every move they made, and that made no sense. Not unless they had already anticipated humanity's strategy. He keyed in a series of commands, his fingers flying over the screen, and within moments, the station's schematic flashed before him. "I was right," Victor muttered. "They're not just trying to wipe us out. They want something else." The officer frowned. "What do you mean?" "The station isn't just a launch site for the AI army. It's a beacon. They've been broadcasting our every move across the galaxy. They've been setting us up for something bigger." A realization hit them both simultaneously. The alien forces weren't just on the offensive, they were preparing for a final, catastrophic strike against the rest of humanity. They were using this station to send coordinates to the rest of the alien fleet. "We're not just fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting for every colony, every surviving human out there," Victor said, his voice low but resolute. "We stop them here, or the entire human race is gone." The officer looked as though he had aged a decade in that moment. "So what now?" Victor's eyes flickered toward the door. The sound of alien footsteps was growing louder. He knew they didn't have much time before the final assault came. His mind raced through the possibilities. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. The pressure was unbearable. "We'll need a diversion," he said, his voice firm. "I'll take out their command center. You hold the line and keep them distracted." "But that's suicide!" Kara exclaimed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't." "I can," Victor said, cutting her off. "And I will. If I don't, they'll finish the job, and we're all dead. You don't get to choose how you die in a war like this." His words hung in the air, the harsh truth echoing in the silence. There were no guarantees. But there were always choices. This was Victor's choice. The officer nodded reluctantly, knowing there was no other option. "Be careful, Victor. We'll hold them back for as long as we can. Victor didn't respond. He didn't need to. His body moved before his mind had fully processed the plan. He was already heading toward the rear exit, pulling a handful of grenades from his pack and sliding them into place along his belt. The weight of the weapons, the armor, the responsibility, they all felt too familiar. But they didn't slow him down. He paused at the door and looked back at the group of rebels. Some were injured, others were still fighting the fear that had crept into their hearts. But they were holding their ground, fighting for the future of humanity. Victor couldn't let them down. Good luck, Kara whispered, her voice cracking. Victor gave her a short nod and stepped through the door. The corridor was dimly lit, every shadow an enemy. The distant rumble of the alien war machines reverberated through the walls. Victor's senses were heightened, every footstep sounding louder than the last. He wasn't just fighting for the survival of the rebellion now, he was fighting for the entire human race, and that weight pressed down on him with every breath. The command center was just ahead. He could see the flickering lights of the security systems through the narrow hallway. It was well guarded, but Victor had faced far worse. He was a ghost, moving silently through the shadows, his heart beating in rhythm with the mission. As he reached the entrance to the command center, a pair of alien soldiers stood guard, their backs turned to him. Victor's hand tightened around the handle of his weapon. There was no room for error. He darted forward, quicker than they could react, and in a flash, both were down, their bodies crumpling to the floor in silence. Victor didn't waste time looking back. He stepped inside. The control room was filled with alien officers, each focused on their screens, unaware of the intruder in their midst. He didn't hesitate. His gunfire was precise, each shot bringing the room one step closer to chaos. But it wasn't the soldiers Victor was after. It was the core. He reached the central control panel, his fingers flying over the alien interface as he initiated the countdown sequence. It was slow, agonizingly slow, but the process was already underway. The alien command center was no longer functional. The core would soon be disabled. But just as the countdown neared its final moments, the air around him shifted. A cold, familiar presence filled the room. Victor's heart stopped. Krovak. The alien overlord appeared at the far end of the room, flanked by two of his elite guards. He stood tall, his alien features twisted in a cruel sneer. You think you've won, human? You've just started a war you cannot finish. Victor's gaze never wavered. I already finished it. With that, he slammed his palm onto the control panel, and the station trembled. The AI's core detonated in a burst of light, and the alien forces collapsed in a wave of fire and debris. The station was silent, the hum of power gone, leaving only the echo of victory and the cost of it. Victor stood alone in the wreckage, his breath steady but his body aching. The galaxy was safe, for now. But the war wasn't over. It had only just begun.